What is the most desperate and depraved thing you've ever done for money? Story 1. A buddy of mine paid me $50 to take a dump on his ex's car. To be fair, she had slashed his tires and busted out all his windows after he caught her cheating, and he wouldn't forgive her. I was there. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to witness. The deal to earn the $50 was to get absurdly drunk, go to a Waffle House, and treat my drunk self to greasy food. He paid for that too. He knew greasy food would mess me up, and that was part of the plan. After about 5 meals at Waffle House and 1 laxative later, I found myself squatting over her car, taking the biggest Cleveland steamer anyone's probably ever seen. All this happened while I was already pretty drunk, and I got even more drunk to follow through. Sober me wouldn't have agreed to it, but drunk me could probably be coaxed into inhaling fiberglass if the price was right. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I had a sugar mama and went to spend a week with her in Philadelphia. I knew she was overweight, we'd talked about it and exchanged pictures, but I wasn't prepared for the reality she was morbidly obese. I am talking 670-something pounds. What really threw me, though, was how unclean she was. I mean, grimy to the point where the people Frank Reynolds hangs out with would look like saints in comparison. Then, out of nowhere, she tried to convince me to move into her basement. I genuinely thought I was never going to make it home. Story 3. I posted an ad on Craigslist for cleaning while all bare, no touching allowed. It quickly transformed to I will let you play but no doing the actual thing, and I won't do anything for you. That went really well, and I made $7,500 in cash in a month. To be honest, I enjoyed pretty much every minute of it. I dated my very first customer and made a great friend out of another. I have a bunch of crazy memories. Crazy in a good way. I finally understood that I am quite freaky, and now I am a member of a non-conventional community. Story 4. I was terribly broke in college after I had been robbed. I was stupid and shouldn't have had so much cash on hand, but I needed to transfer some money quickly, and the turnaround time for that via check was way too long. Unfortunately, the jerk neighbor next door, who was a friend, knew I would have cash on me for about 6 hours, robbed me blind, and left town. I noticed this Coca-Cola machine by the lab I was in, and I really wanted to spoil myself and enjoy an ice-cold Coke. However, I had 23 cents in pennies and needed 65 cents in silver change. That is when I realized I could get that amount without too much trouble. I went out to that parking garage in the freezing weather and took out my little keychain flashlight. I headed over to where the meters were and got down on my hands and knees, searching in the gap under those concrete stoppers for change. I went at it for an hour and got filthy in all the grimy snow, mud, oil, and gas that was on the ground. Every time I found another dime, nickel, or quarter, I started cheering quietly to myself for the stupid little victory. Finally, I gathered up enough change for the pop and walked back inside. People thought I had stepped out and gotten the crap kicked out of me because of how I looked. I didn't give a damn about the soaked and gross clothes I had on at that point. I was absolutely victorious. That was by far the best drink I have ever had in my life. Sitting there and drinking, that Coke was the moment I realized how crappy things had gotten, and the fact that I worked that hard for 65 cents was awful. I went and started working an insane amount more, went to a soup kitchen when I had to, and walked a couple of miles to campus instead of driving my van. The whole experience sucked, but it built up a lot of character, all for the low price of 65 cents. Story 5. I acted in some OF videos with a girl I had a friends with benefits thing with. I wasn't comfortable doing it, but I was drowning in debt and my EI had run out, so I agreed. She paid me, and we made a video once a week for about 4 to 5 months. It helped me get out of debt and pay the bills until I found a job. The biggest thing I sacrificed was my self-esteem. A few weeks in, she admitted she asked me because I am kinda ugly and a little fat, but that just makes me relatable to her fans. It really made me feel disgusted and absolutely destroyed any sort of self-worth I had. Story 6. I had sneaky smoosh a couple times with my aunt for about $700. She and my uncle are still married, and he doesn't know about it. Their child, my cousin, thinks so highly of me, and family gatherings are still awkward, as she's constantly trying to get me to do it with her again. Story 7. I drank a cup of blazing sauce from BWW for $80. I was fine for about 2 minutes before my insides were burning all the way to my stomach. After 5 minutes, I started having a sharp pain in my stomach. Then, after 15 minutes, I became dizzy, nauseous, and had a hard time walking. Shortly after, I threw up a lot and was sick the rest of the day. Story 8. I had to come up with titles for hundreds of corn videos. It was on one of those online digital work sites. The task was to look through random still images from a corn video and create a descriptive title. If you've been on any corn site, you know what I am talking about. It was all piecework, paying about 7 to 9 cents each, dropped in batches of around 30,000 on the site. It was first come, first served for which worker got to do them. It sounds like fun at first, but it got mentally grueling after a while, doing so many at once and struggling to keep coming up with titles. I could never quite do enough fast enough to earn even minimum wage, but I was holed up in bed at the time with various medical issues and had nothing else going on, so I was still happy to do it. Story 9. I was 20, broke, and about to be homeless. A guy I used to work for thought I was hot and said he'd pay me $100 if I let him have a taste of my popsicle while I worked with his tool. That 100 helped me get my life back on track. I am doing much better now. I have a great job as a software developer and recently finished my bachelor's degree. That whole incident happened 15 years ago, but it was a rough patch that helped shape where I am today. Story 10. I attended a cult that was, in many ways, a hate group. I was the only person of color there, and because I have a slight British twang in my accent, they accepted me, mostly as tokenism. At the time, I was unemployed and couch surfing, and this was the only way I could get a decent meal, especially during Thanksgiving and Christmas. One cult member even referred me for a job, but I ended up getting a better position elsewhere and left. The food was good, yes, but the hateful rhetoric still scares me to this day, especially because one of my friends from that group was offed earlier this year by a member of that cult. Story 11. I needed to scrape up some cash one time between jobs, and the end of the month was nearing. Someone contacted me, and I joined a Skype meeting with about 8 others. The task was to chat with guys, pretending to be these girls on a website. I had to keep them engaged and read past conversations, so whatever I said was coherent and in line with the chat. I got paid about 15 cents for every reply I made that was at least 30 characters long. I was desperate and did the job really well. I made enough for the end of the month and some extra for myself. I stopped the next month. The next month, I needed cash again. I discovered you could upload videos and get paid per 100 views. It was one of those websites where you have to click the X to close all the ads that keep popping up. I think it paid about $1 per 1,000 views. So, I uploaded corn, using catchy titles on Discord and forums. I had to make the titles clickbaity so people would watch, for example, college freshman does corn to pay for books. Awesome ending. I made about $25 in a week. Money was tight, but that 25 really saved me. After that month, I got real gigs. Story 12. I took part for a medical study in college. I was told I would receive a free dental checkup as part of the study, plus $75 25 years ago. First, they gave me a questionnaire about going to the dentist and whether I had any fears related to it. I didn't. Going to the dentist sometimes involves discomfort, but it's always worth it. Next, they hooked a bunch of probes to my face, which stayed on for the entire study. Then, they had me watch a slideshow of random images, a field of flowers, a toaster, a Rottweiler with teeth bared, a smiling woman, a dentist drill, a book, a gun pointed at the camera, an airplane, a dentist chair, and so on. He said, "I am now going to use a Florida probe which will measure the distance between your tooth and gum." He stuck the probe between the tooth and gum of my back molar, and I nearly jumped out of the chair in pain. It hit a nerve and hurt like hell. He applied the Florida probe to every one of my teeth, and I was doing a quick, panicky inhale every time he went in. When he finished, all my teeth felt like they were vibrating. You a-holes! I seriously considered spending my $75 on a baseball bat and going back to tell them what I thought of their study. Story 13. A few years ago, I worked as an S-worker. I was good at keeping guys chatting for an hour once I showed up, but there was one dude who really liked me to go to a nearby gas station with him while he bought powder, then get all bare at his house so he could ogle me while he got all cracked out. Eventually, he'd bring his flagpole out but could never get it up. The whole experience was so gross. Gross is the word. I went back 4 more times, $200 to hang out with him for an hour. Story 14. I used to pose bare for art classes while I was an undergrad. The pay was pretty good, about 5 times minimum wage. One grad student, who was a good artist but kind of odd, asked if I would do a private session for a few hours. I agreed because I was desperate for money. I figured I had just been hired for some banging. I was a bit conflicted but thought, why not? I showed up clean, prepped, and dressed to look good. It turned out the artist really just wanted me to pose. During the whole session, they were polite but very specific about poses, and it was actually a bit challenging. They were so intense. While not particularly good-looking, their talent and effort were kind of a turn-on. By the end, I was half hoping it would turn into something more and that they would keep telling me how to pose and what to do. So I guess I learned I would be willing to do the deed for money in some situations. Story 15. A few notable things. 3. He tried to involve me with his older gay friends, suggesting I could be a hot commodity. I considered it briefly, but decided it wasn't for me. 5. I had a long-distance partner who was excited by the idea and enjoyed hearing my stories. Sometimes I made things up to be more salacious. 6. I had to end it when I realized the arrangement was harming him more than helping. He was seeking intimacy, not just being physical, and I felt guilty for taking advantage. He also got uncomfortable when I reminded him why he had to pay if I was enjoying it. Story 16. I have been paid for my other skill. I was working as a concierge during a rough economic year when a powerful businesswoman took a liking to me. She told me she was going out to pick someone up one night and that I was her backup. I said, "I hope you strike out." She came back right before my shift ended and told me to come upstairs afterward. I changed clothes, put on a hat, went up, and she paid me before I signed an NDA. I called out the next day to catch up on sleep. I've also been paid to be involved in some freaky things a few times. That was through Tinder, where they outright suggested it. I wasn't interested at first until they offered $500 per session. Story 17. When I was in college, my roommate and I once gave blood and sold all of our comic books, then took the money, about $40 each, to the dog track, where our plan was to win enough money to pay rent. We bought a race program several hours before the race and spent hours picking our dogs with elaborate trifecta and quinella boxed and keyed bets. We were actually pretty sure we were going to win. Of course we didn't. We drove home with $3 between us, stopped at a gas station that was getting rid of the unsold remnants of a failed type of beer called Colt 45 Menthol. It was either green or blue, I can't remember which, for 39 cents per quart. We told the clerk our story about giving blood in the dog track, and he felt sorry for us and gave us 2 old gas station hot dogs he was going to throw out. We both got food poisoning and missed work for 3 days, during which time we were fired for no-call/no-show to our jobs. We worked at the same restaurant and got evicted. This was before cell phones, and our phone had been cut off for non-payment the week before. It all worked out in the end, because after we were homeless for a couple of days, I moved in with a girl who later became my wife, and the next semester, I won tuition playing roulette. Story 18. I co-owned a construction company in the early 2000s with a friend. We remodeled apartment complexes across the country. We had been trying to get in with the largest property management firm in the country, whose corporate office was in Chicago. The woman who awarded contracts took a shine to me. A huge contract to do a full exterior rehab on 3 adjacent complexes was on the table. It was made clear that a night with her would secure the contract, which held nearly $2 million in profit over 3 years. Doing it with her didn't sound like a big deal, but she was a very tall, large German woman who looked like Kathy Bates, but uglier and 30 years my senior. I was sure the little general wouldn't stand at attention. It was like being with a female Shrek. Whiskey, my skills, strong stomach, and a damn good crew put me on the road to being able to retire at 40 if I had chosen to. Story 19. I sold my eggs 3 times and made $28,000 over a period of 2 years. It involved twice-weekly TV ultrasounds for 2 weeks, 10 days of injecting a cocktail of hormones into my thigh and stomach, and an outpatient surgical procedure at the end of that. The screening process required an IQ test, an MMPI personality test, medical screening plus the medical history of everyone in my family going back to my grandparents, a drug test, and filming an interview for prospective couples. Once I completed all that, I got matched within 24 hours. I signed away all custodial rights and agreed never to try to contact or find out anything about the offspring my donation produced. This was about 8 years ago. I know all 3 donations resulted in successful pregnancies and that one of them was a boy. One of the families asked me to donate a 4th time so their son would have a biological sibling, but I declined. All in all, not a bad experience, except for the time I got to be a med student's very first ultrasound. Uncomfortable on many, many levels. Story 20. This isn't really desperate, but I did kind of made some good money doing it. Our school took a huge health turn one year because childhood obesity rates had gone up over the last decade or so. To respond to hundreds of angry parents, the Board of Health demanded the school remove all soda and candy machines from the cafeterias and replace all greasy, unhealthy foods on the menu with healthier alternatives. White bread became wheat bread, French fries became veggie sticks, and so on. This pissed us kids off greatly because what high school kid doesn't like soda and French fries? A lot of us depended on that sugar rush to finish out the school day, especially since we didn't have time or money for gas to drive to Wawa before school to get coffee, nor the convenience of a coffee bar accessible to students. So, what did I do? Devised a plan. It was simple, really. Walmart sold 24-can boxes of Dr. Pepper, Mountain Dew, Pepsi, Sierra Mist, etc. for about $4 per box. I would fill an extra backpack with one of those boxes every other day and keep it in my locker. I would spend the $4 on a box of soda and sell each can individually for $1. That's $20 profit per box, minus the $4 overhead for each. I would be buying about 3 boxes per week, so it'd be around $12 weekly overhead with $60 profit. I was making bank. I would established a rather large clientele in my graduating class, and soon everyone knew me as that guy with the soda. People wondered what soda I would have for them each day. It was usually Mountain Dew, since it was the most popular and requested. Trash cans overflowed with empty Mountain Dew cans, and teachers began wondering where kids were getting them from. You had a buck? You got a soda? It was pretty simple that way, and no one really complained. I actually had a few teachers and custodial staff on my client list, and each day it grew. I was making almost $240 each week just selling damn cans of soda. This included repeat customers, kids who would buy more than one a day, which I had no problem with as long as supplies lasted. I kept more than one box in my locker and could access more than one type of soda. So if someone wanted Mountain Dew and another wanted Dr. Pepper, I wouldn't have to compromise the next loadout. And just plain kids who heard I sold soda and wanted one to have with lunch. So naturally, I did what any GPA-conscious student would do and let them confiscate and dispose of my soda. All in all, I made around $800 just selling cans of soda. I used that money to pay for a road trip up to Newfoundland with my two friends, and we drank, partied, and had a good time. Yay! Soda! Story 21. About 10 years ago, when I was homeless, a kind old homeless lady I used to buy water and snacks for was crying because she was $20 short of getting a hotel room for the night and really wanted to shower. So, I had a friend drive me to Walmart, and I walked around the parking lot looking for receipts until I found one with something decent that wasn't food. It had a $40 case of diapers on it. I went inside, matched the barcode on the receipt to a box of diapers on the shelf, and went up to customer service, saying my mom wanted me to return them. I got $40 cash, gave half to the lady for her hotel, and spent the rest on food and drinks. She was so happy she started crying again and hugged me. I still think about that day a lot. Story 22. I met a complete stranger from the internet to sell him some old and used inners. If it had been a mail-in thing, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But part of the deal was that he wanted me to meet him in person to give them to him, and then he would pay me in cash. It was a pretty good amount, so I went for it. We talked for a while beforehand, and he was really nice. I didn't get the vibe that I was going to get offed, and I needed the money. It was a quick meet in a Walmart parking lot. Nothing really bad happened. Story 23. A few years after high school, one of my high school crushes messaged me on Facebook. I was between jobs and still living at home. She said she was coming back into town and wanted to hang out. I didn't have any money for a date, so I took some rifles that were handed down to me by family to a pawn shop to sell. They offered me a ridiculously low amount. I felt embarrassed and put on the spot, but wanted the date to happen. I sold the rifles. The next day, we got to talking and she apologized, telling me we wouldn't be hanging out because she was going on a date with one of her crushes from high school. Story 24. I intern at one of the best IT companies possible, but their cafe has a stupid rule, cash only. I had $1.80 in cash after adding the dimes and pennies I found on the sidewalk. I was hungry after walking a mile to work that afternoon, so I grabbed a slice of pizza. I stood in the queue with some senior managers and engineers behind me, thankfully none of whom I knew. When it was my turn, I was asked to pay $2.10. I handed over the $1.80 I had, and the lady at the counter looked stunned as if we were in a deadlock. She saw my hoodie and figured out I was a student. She couldn't let me slide since her supervisor was within eyesight, and supervisors are notoriously strict when it comes to generosity. None of the others in the queue moved to help. Then she said she'd pay the difference out of her own pocket. Being the only person paid hourly, she knew what I was going through. That was the single most blessed moment I would had in a long time right before Christmas vacation. I don't usually get any presents for Christmas, so I consider those 30 cents the ultimate Christmas gift. And when I see the post where kids bash their parents for gifting them an iPad, I wonder what these people lack. Story 25. This is more of a desperate situation involving money than something desperate I did for money. When I was 14 or 15, I brought my guitar to school once to play at a field day type of event. Some of the students gave me money like I was busking, but one of the teachers stopped it. Anyway, I made about $3. One day I got so hungry that I took some of that $3 to buy a bag of chips. I had held on to that money for over 5 years, the first money I ever made from music, and I spent it on food. I regretted it almost immediately. Later, I even regretted not going back to ask the cashier for it. I am sure they would have at least held on to it until I could reimburse them. It really makes my heart sink when I think about it. Story 26. I once did an English report for my high school yearbook's senior editor, so she'd pay for my yearbook for me because my family was in a rough stretch. I was on the yearbook staff, and I couldn't even afford the book I was working on. Even though it sounds dishonorable, I loved English, and getting more out of my education and making money was a win-win. It was about Milne, the author of Winnie the Pooh. Interesting fact, he was actually really annoyed by his success as a children's author. Story 27. 2 things. I had a private sesh with an unbelievably grotesque girl who was obsessed with me on spring break for $20. I've also drank a full bottle of Tabasco sauce for $5. Everyone has a price. Story 28. You can donate or sell plasma and/or blood at a lot of hospitals. I donated plasma as part of a study which compensates more because of human subjects, research ethics, and all that. The study required donors to have either had or been vaccinated against H1N1, so they had H1N1 antibodies, making it a more specific population and thus even more cash. I made $1,310 over about 6 months by donating plasma 10 times, each session taking about 90 minutes. I worked at that hospital, so I would just come in early for work, which meant I didn't add any time to my commute or anything like that. Sweet gig. Story 29. I've never been truly desperate, but I sold my plasma a couple of times in college when I was insanely low on cash. I definitely suggest people do it if they need money. The first time I did it, I got $50, and every time after that was $40. I could usually donate twice a week. Just make sure you aren't afraid of needles and don't mind getting poked more than once. The nurses they have there are usually just young people starting medical school. Edit. They will also automatically test your blood for HIV, syphilis, and hepatitis B and C. So it's basically a free mini STD test as well. Story 30. When I first started culinary school, I was struggling to find a job, and my mother had to pay all of my bills, even though money was pretty tight without me in the picture. Christmas came around, and it got to the point where I knew I would either need to ask her for some money to buy presents for the family, or I would have to sit Christmas out that year. One day on 4chan, an anon offered to pay $125 to anyone willing to write a 7-page paper for them in 2 days, $75 down, $50 upon delivery. So, I did it. Everything went better than expected, and it made Christmas for me. Story 31. This isn't the most desperate thing I've done, but first time living on my own outside of the dorms, I was broke. I didn't know at the time that I received a financial aid refund to pay for expenses, and it went straight to my dad's bank account without my knowledge. Since I lived off campus, I didn't have money for laundry or food loaded onto my ID card anymore, and I went through my savings from pre-college jobs pretty fast. I was too proud to ask for money. I ended up selling the vast majority of my personal effects, including my guitar, N64, and all my games, and a few minor family heirlooms like old books. I am now pretty certain that some of the books were worth a good deal more than I sold them for. I had some first editions, signed books, and very well-preserved books dating back to the 1600s. A couple years later, I found out just how much I shouldn't have trusted my father with any of my finances. That made the regret so much worse. Story 32. I had to pretend to do long division, not actually do it. Just pretend. It was for a behavioral psychology experiment. The subject thought we were the ones being tested, and their job was to use certain strategies to get us to do long division faster. but we were accomplices of the researcher and had to do the long division at a predetermined rate. We had a pile of completed problems, a pile of undone ones, and a chart telling us how often to add another to the completed pile. The subject would come in as they saw fit and collect the completed problems. If I recall correctly, I got paid $20 for 3 hours in 1994. It was pretty mind-numbing, but not bad money for sitting in a little room furtively shuffling paper. And as a university student, it all helps. I drew the line at becoming a Kirby vacuum cleaner salesperson, though. I sat through 1.25 days of unpaid training and learned how to convince little old ladies that their houses were full of microscopic horrors that needed a Kirby suckin'. When they let us out for a morning break on the second day, I bailed and never looked back. Story 33. I work full-time, have 2 kids, and am married, but needed extra cash to cover our living above our means lifestyle, which of course isn't hard. So I took up one of those catalog delivery gigs. I figured a couple of hours a night after the kids went to bed, a few bucks, plus some exercise, win all around. First, it took 3 hours to sort the catalogs out. Then the next night, I started at 8 p.m. after the kids went to bed and gave up halfway through at 12:30 a.m. I had to be up at 6 for my regular job. I went back the next night and finished it off at 1 a.m. I walked a total of 14 kilometers, dragging a crappy cart up and down the worst hills around. About 13 hours of work all up, for the grand sum of $50. A nice $3 plus change per hour, and that was with my wife helping with the sorting. I didn't do a second run. Story 34. So, I had $100. I went to the local casino and used it to play poker. I managed to turn that 100 into 250 the first night and kept an hourly rate of $30 playing limit poker, temporarily becoming a professional poker player. What's desperate about this? Because I could just as easily have lost that money too. Story 35. I participated in some market research for a new beer. Sounded great at the time. I get paid to drink beer? Anyway, it was a bunch of different beers in small plastic cups, all of which started out tasting like the strainings of the devil's underpants and progressively got worse. They kept bringing more out until one guy cracked, swiped all his beers off the table, and stormed out yelling, "I wouldn't even give this crap to my dog." I still don't know if it was market research or some bizarre psychological experiment. Story 36. I joined a medical study researching the effects of severe weight gain and weight loss on bone marrow. It involved 10 days of eating 6,000 calories a day, followed by 10 days of not eating anything. You had to stay in a hospital room the entire time. Every day they took a bone marrow sample, which was decidedly not fun. $7,000 at the end of the 20 days. Story 37. I was newly broke as a joke and had a date in a few hours. She wanted to go to Red Lobster. I went through my car, my parents' cars, my sister's cars, couches, everything looking for coins. I also had a partially used gift card to somewhere. I took it all to the grocery store, cashed in the change, and sold the gift card for practically nothing. I had just enough to cover myself. If she expected me to get the bill, I was finished. I would have to own up to having like $31.25 to my name. Luckily, she didn't. She piped up and split the bill. So now we're married. Story 38. I participated in a U.S. Department of Defense study examining the effects of sleep and calorie deprivation and whether testosterone supplementation could offset those effects. During the first week, I went to the study location every day, weighed in, received food, had blood drawn, took a test to measure my resting metabolic rate, and did some exercise familiarization. At the end, they took a muscle biopsy from my thigh. I also received 2 injections but didn't know whether they were testosterone or a placebo oil. For the 2nd through 4th weeks, 21 days, I stayed at the location. It consisted of 4 5-day cycles. 3 days were high stress with 4 hours of sleep, and 2 days were low stress with 8 hours of sleep. High-stress days also included an extra workout session. They woke me up at 4 a.m. every day. Most days started with blood drawings. Every day included a weigh-in and urine check, a small snack, then an outdoor ruck march for several miles carrying a 70-pound pack. The distance varied between about 4 and 10 miles. After that, food, followed by a workout session including treadmill rucking, treadmill walking, elliptical, and biking. Then lunch. After lunch, military activities like sled pulls, farmer walks, and hole digging. Then another workout session, then dinner. High-stress days had another session after dinner. Every 6 days, we were tested for strength and completed a set-distance ruck along a fixed path instead of the usual free-roam morning ruck. We also had ongoing cognitive testing throughout. At the end of this phase, they took another muscle biopsy. For the final 4 weeks, I went in every day to be weighed, receive food, and check in. At the end, they took one last muscle biopsy and ran one more round of strength and cognitive testing. The second phase was designed to mimic parts of Ranger School. I rucked about 20 miles a day with a 70-pound rucksack, not including the miles walked, biked, or done on the elliptical. By the end, I hadn't seen my pinky toes in days because of all the bandages. I had moleskin on the balls of my feet, where the blisters never had time to heal. I was asleep on my feet whenever I didn't have a physical task, but they wouldn't let us rest unless it was bedtime midnight to 4 or 8 to 4, depending on the day. We watched all of Game of Thrones and several movie series, including the Annabelle movies. I also lost 16 pounds during those 20 days. I nearly quit, but didn't. The pay was really good, and I had the summer off as a teacher. Story 39. When I was 17, I worked a 100% commission-based job. No base pay, just whatever you could sell. I had to pay rent just to sleep on a duvet on the floor of my boss' apartment, crammed in with 7 other employees. On top of that, I covered all my own travel expenses, petrol, Airbnbs, train tickets, everything. It might not look like the worst situation from the outside, but the guilt, the stress, the sheer embarrassment I carried through all of it, that was something else. Screw that job. Story 40. Back when payphones were still a thing, my car broke down in a seedy part of town, and of course I didn't have my wallet on me. Around 3 in the morning, I stumbled into a ghetto-ass bar and asked for a quarter to call my parents. Nobody offered, except one lady who said she'd give me a quarter if I danced with her. She reeked of whiskey and rye, but I danced anyway and got that quarter. While I waited for my parents to pick me up, she pinched me on my cakes. That was the loneliest 30 minutes I've ever had. Story 41. When I was younger, I was homeless for a while and lived in Massachusetts. Summers were easy, but from late fall to mid-spring it was far too cold to be without a bed. We'd stay at a local motel, cancel the stay during the day to avoid paying, then rebook for the night. We also took money from the tip jar. A little old lady always worked the front desk. She knew our situation and was perfectly fine with us taking the tips and only booking nights. She even told us where they stored the buffet food no one ate. A chilled room meant for workers to eat from, but they never did. Eventually, the motel manager found us out and almost kicked us out. Thankfully, he was a nice guy, and my dad talked him into letting us stay. My dad and mom also got jobs there, and all 4 of us, me, my dad, my mom, and my sister, were allowed to stay in the suite, which had 3 beds instead of the usual 1 bed, and a large couch like the other rooms. Thanks to that man, God bless his soul. He passed away in 2020 from COVID. We were able to eventually move into a project development and later into our own apartment. I am now 16, almost 17. This was 5 years ago. I now live in a pretty decent-sized house that my parents own in one of the southern states. Just a reminder to everyone going through hard times, no matter the situation, it will get better. Just give it time and keep working for what you want. Story 42. So this guy asks, "Is that your truck?" I say, "Yeah, it is." He asks, "Would you haul something for me?" He had about 3 pallets of an old patent medicine called Vico Salve stored in a warehouse. He paid us $40 to haul it off to the dump. Vico Salve used to be manufactured in our town before the FDA shut it down for selling medicine with no real effect. A while later, at a street fair in town, I shaved my beard into mutton chops, threw on a red checkered suit coat and solid red pants, and set up a table to hawk Vico Salve just like an old-time patent medicine salesman. Step right up, folks, and get the miracle cure, Vico Salve. I sold about a dozen bottles. After that, old-timers would send me letters asking for more, usually starting with, "I used this on my old hound dog back in the day," and then rambling for 3 pages about that dog. Story 43. Some bloke's garage was the social spot, with fights happening in the yard. A bunch of lads would toss in $20 each, no weight divisions, strictly one-on-one. That's not to say there weren't rules. There were gentlemen's rules. If you behaved like a prick, you'd get mobbed. Everyone knew not to put the boot in if someone was down, no going for the groin on purpose, and no attempts to permanently maim, like gouging eyes. If your opponent called it quits, or the crowd shouted to stop, you stopped. As for styles, anything was allowed, but there wasn't much style on display. Mostly big gym heads hitting one another. A couple of lads had real skill, and 1 or 2 absolute lunatics who I genuinely believe fought just for the thrill, even for free. I got tenderized more than once in that yard, but I kept my head moving and my hands high. It wasn't a highlight of my life, nor something I am proud of, so please don't ask about wins or losses. Why did I do it? I was dirt poor and had just started a relationship with a woman I love very, very much. It's a fact of life that you need more than moths in your pockets if you want to date a lass, and that meant I needed some cash. Scrapping was something I could do, and it was the gateway to what I wanted most. Story 44. I've seen a few people talking about selling jewelry, so I figured I would share this story. After my grandma died and we went through her condo, I found a really pretty ring. She always had cheap, fake costume jewelry, so I was surprised to find this gorgeous wedding or engagement ring. My mom said it wasn't my grandma's wedding ring. Maybe it belonged to my great-grandma, but I didn't assume it was made of quality materials since it had never been mentioned, and my family was always fairly poor. I tried to sell it for drugs multiple times. Something always got in the way. One time, my phone died just as we pulled up to the dealer's house and wouldn't charge, so we had to turn back. Eventually, I got sober and paid to have the ring resized. It turned out to be real white gold with diamonds and was appraised for over $1,000. I'm glad I didn't trade a nearly 100-year-old ring for $50 worth of dope. I like to think my ancestors were looking out for me. Story 45. Years ago, when I found myself in a pretty rough spot in life purely because of unbridled alcoholism, I got pretty good at lifting booze. I always followed the rule, steal from places, not people. I wasn't stealing to resell, but about twice a week I would hit a grocery store's liquor section with my own canvas bag, toss in a couple of 1.75-liter plastic bottles of booze, then grab a few pre-made sandwiches from the deli and some chips before just walking out the front door. No one ever stopped me or even looked twice. I am pretty sure they either knew and didn't get paid enough to care or were completely oblivious. I remember after stealing my first bottle of booze, I was so nervous I was shaking uncontrollably as I walked out the doors and through the parking lot, trying my hardest to act casual and not constantly look over my shoulder. Once I realized food and booze could be free, I could spend the little money I made working part-time at a restaurant on the important things, like rent and cigarettes, because they're the one thing you can't steal from the store. I think I did this for close to 6 months straight, at least once a week, if not twice, and never got caught. I am sure there's CCTV footage of me somewhere, and there had to have been employees who knew, but nothing ever came of it. I've been away from that lifestyle for a considerable time now. It baffles me to think about how ungodly easy it was. The only real-life friend I ever told said they probably kept a running tab on how much I would take in, waiting for it to reach a threshold to classify as a bigger theft, which could very well be true. But I haven't been to that store in years, and if it weren't for this thread, I probably wouldn't have thought about it again for quite some time. I am not proud of it, and I am glad I never got in trouble, but damn, it was easy. Story 46. I started doing odd jobs, driving for Uber for hours every day, and working as a temp in a factory until my wrists were bleeding from folding boxes. During that time, my girlfriend was offered $800 to spend a night with a guy. It was the hardest decision of our lives. I told her not to do it if she didn't want to, but that the money would really help. In the end, she didn't do it, and with help from both our families, we made it to the end of the lease. It was a rough time. Story 47. Some might not consider this desperate or embarrassing. I did my share to contribute, but during that time I also applied for TANF and food stamps. Their father had passed away suddenly, and we were waiting on insurance. I was a stay-at-home mom as planned, but his passing out of state brought extra expenses that wiped out our savings. The timing couldn't have been worse. The circumstances surrounding his death also delayed things significantly. It took an inordinate amount of time to settle. Soon after, my mother passed away, making it an exceptional time of grief mixed with a do-or-die situation. By the grace of God, I was able to turn things around for my kiddos. When the children were involved, I made it a game for them, fun and as safe as possible, never letting them know the true situation, just that it was a game. They were very young and already going through a lot they didn't fully understand. Such is life. Prayers for all of you going through difficult times. Don't lose hope. There are hotlines and numerous sliding scale counseling services available. It may seem like there's only despair, but you're not alone. I am even willing to open my DMs if anyone reading this needs a compassionate ear. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.